When my husband Matt and I were just a few months into dating, I took him to my cousin's wedding. They had wanted a Saturday night reception, and because the wedding was at a Catholic church, they got married during the regular Saturday Mass. A lot of people who attended the regular Mass didn't get the memo that the reception was only planned for the people who were actually invited to the wedding. And so a lot of extra people just showed up at the reception. Wanting to be informal and just let people mix, there were no place cards. There were no table numbers, so it wasn't clear, probably even to the party crashers, whether this was an open reception or not. The venue rolled out extra tables, but there just weren't enough places for everyone to sit. Even the parents of the bride and groom wound up finding they didn't have a seat. My cousins had put so much effort into this day, and how disappointing and stressful it must have been to find out that they couldn't accommodate all the guests who had come to celebrate with them. And yes, there definitely were party crashers, but any host would feel responsible if their guests weren't being cared for, even if it wasn't really their fault. So, knowing that there just wasn't enough food, Matt and I snuck out and ate at a nearby Greek restaurant, which also meant there was just a little more food to go around and 2 more chairs for the extra guests. By the time we returned to the reception, dinner was over and the venue was getting set up for dancing. They had a great DJ, and it remains one of the most fun weddings I've ever attended, maybe because there were so many extra guests. It's so interesting that in John, Jesus' first miracle is to keep the party going. Unlike the other Gospels, it's not healing or exorcising a demon or blowing people's minds with earth-shattering proclamations about a new world order in the kingdom of heaven. The Jesus John shows us is one who is concerned with abundance and with restoring community. John's Jesus, after all, is the one who says, "I came that they might have life and have it abundantly." John's Jesus is the one who heals the blind and restores them to community. Jesus accomplishes a lot at the wedding in Cana, showing God's wide abundance, helping the hosts avoid shame, and restoring and strengthening community. Refreshments are an integral part of any gathering. It's why we have churches. It's why churches have coffee hour after services, not because the coffee and the snacks are so great, even if they are, but because it gives people a reason to stick around and chat. And it's why we have dinners after our evening services at Lord of Light. Yes, of course, people need to be fed, but that's not why we have Sunday meals. Food is an incredible community builder. It's something that gets people to sit down across from each other and chat, discovering where their differences and commonalities lie. It's the opener. And in first century Judea, with unclean water, wine was the drink of choice. Without it, the guests would have started to go home. The host's honor would have been at stake because they would have failed to care for their guests. Without enough wine to go around, the community would have been broken. But Jesus doesn't just gift the partygoers with a couple more jugs to tide them over until the steward can run out to the corner store and pick up some more Franzia. He converts 6 enormous 30-gallon jars of water into wine. That's 180 gallons. That's an abundance, enough to keep a giant party going. And the steward notices and remarks to the bridegroom, "This isn't cheap stuff. Wow, you saved the best for last." Jesus' first miracle in John is a miracle of transformation, of extravagant abundance. In John, Jesus certainly goes on to heal people suffering from various diseases, giving life to those who have been cut off from their communities and restoring them to wholeness. But in this story, we see God's abundant grace poured out in the midst of joyous celebration. We see Jesus helping a couple to celebrate the beginning of their life together and to provide abundant hospitality to their guests. Jesus isn't concerned that we just get by because God's grace has never been about providing the bare minimum. God's grace is poured out in marvelous excess. And it's important because this community, the one who is there celebrating with the bride and groom on the day that marks the beginning of their life together, it's the same one that will see them through their most difficult days. These kinds of celebratory mountaintop experiences strengthen our communities for the difficult days ahead. A couple needs a wedding so that they not only have joyful memories to bring them through the mundane and difficult times, but so that they can affirm the community that will continue to support them in their life together. Baptism is normally public because it is an opportunity for a person to be lifted up and affirmed by an entire community, and for that community to make promises regarding the way they will journey with the baptized. A party is something that provides a break in the ordinary, a bit of grace and beauty when life is often marked by difficulty. The God of the Sabbath also admonishes us to let our hair down once in a while because we need these moments of joy to carry us through when things are tough. Perhaps the reason a person might be surprised that this is the first miracle in John is because we've come to believe Jesus is a Puritan with good, solid work ethic, and the Jesus who keeps the party going doesn't exactly fit that image. But Jesus knew that all of life doesn't have to be serious, and in fact, it can't be. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to be generous. It's okay to even be a little excessive. But it's also important to note, Jesus doesn't do this act in front of the whole wedding as a party trick, and he doesn't create wine from water just for himself. He doesn't hoard it or ensure that it's something that can make his own personal time better at the expense of everyone else. He does this behind the scenes for all the people who are gathered to celebrate this wonderful occasion, and he demands nothing in return for his gift. And then John tells us that the steward compliments the groom about his wonderful wine, not Jesus. Instead of saying something like, "and all were amazed," John tells us this miracle strengthened the faith of a small group of disciples. As always, Jesus' miracle isn't about him. It's about making things better for others. It's about sharing God's grace with those who need it most. This is why we share communion each Sunday. We remember that we receive this grace even though we haven't earned it. We remember that our lives are precious to the God who loves us and calls us God's own. We remember in the wine that is poured the extravagant gift that God gave us in God's own Son. Jesus' very first miracle in John stands in stark contrast to our transactional society, a society that says you need to keep your head down, that you get what you deserve, that you'd better not have too much fun. But God is not transactional. God's grace is wild and precious, just like the lives God has gifted us with. And we are called to live lives defined by that radical, reckless grace, a generosity that gives so much more than is needed. Life isn't a zero-sum game. More for you doesn't mean less for me, and vice versa. I don't need to build a wall to keep you out of my life. I need to build a bigger table to include you in it. When the wine ran out, Jesus didn't help the bride and groom kick out the guests. He found a way to extend their hospitality without them even knowing there was a problem in the first place. And that is how God breaks into our lives, showing us again and again the abundant, extravagant love God has for us. Because we are each children of God, we are welcomed to the table. Amen.